Right, well, I'm going to begin by saying hello, James. Just wondered, of course, you're here in London promoting a tour at the moment, but you're obviously also behind the score for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the latest and sort of newest addition in some ways to the Harry Potter franchise. I was wondering how you came to be involved in this particular project and what was the initial draw for you?
Well, I came to be involved because it was a movie I very badly wanted to do. Obviously, all the Harry Potter movies have been great musical opportunities and with an incredible legacy, and J.K. Rowling they're so imaginative, and they're just wonderful musical opportunities. So I actually put together a reel of what I thought would be relevant music and solicited and sort of hoped for the best. And lo and behold, I got hired for it. But the draw was just an opportunity to create a new melodic sort of world and a new musical franchise along with the new film franchise.
So did it help? I mean, you sort of more often than not, I guess, when you get involved in a project, it's something of a blank canvas. But in this, you have got a sort of whole franchise of movies that have already kind of established this quite specific tone and what the Potter universe is trying, sort of vying to achieve. Was that quite helpful? Was that almost quite distracting having those films in some way?
No, I mean, it's very helpful, but you have to remember this is not a Harry Potter film. This is a prequel, if you will, historically speaking, to Potter. So I felt that the movie, in order for it to really succeed, that the movie and the music have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, independent of Harry Potter. Certainly we paid homage to John Williams' incredible theme in the beginning over the Warner Brothers logo, but and in 1 or 2 other very small places, but the rest of it is all new themes for all new characters.
So what did you sort of draw your inspiration from most? Was it conversations with David? Was it the screenplay? I mean, had you seen any sort of footage? I mean, what would you say was the main thing that kind of captured your own imagination and helped you craft this score?
Well, I think certainly the legacy of the music that has come before in the 8 Harry Potter films was an influence. So what a magical fantasy epic film is supposed to sound like, that essentially orchestral based and really strong themes. So my first order of business was to sit down and just write some music that I thought might be applicable. So I wrote 2 themes for David, and we talked a lot, and I sent over 2 8-minute suites that involved 2 themes, one of which became kind of the main umbrella theme for the Fantastic Beasts universe, and the other one became Eddie Redmayne's character, Newt Scamander, became his theme. So they were very useful.
I mean, do you find that you need to have seen any footage of a film first before you can really begin, or is that a bit of a luxury anyway in your profession to have been able to see that?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a luxury. Ultimately, it's a necessity for most directors. I mean, some directors don't mind whether you write something to picture or not, and that's perfectly viable. But in this case, and actually in most cases now, I prefer to turn off the movie once I've had conversations with the director and read the script, and just try and write some music that seems reflective of what my information is and what my intuition is. And more often than not, that music will have something to do with the final version of the score.
And I mean, this film works incredibly well as a standalone feature, but obviously it has got the ties to the Harry Potter universe, which means and almost guarantees there'll be a lot of people queuing up to go and see this.
I hope so.
What do you think it is about the kind of Potter world that is just so popular? What has J.K. Rowling created, and what do you think it is that has just captured the imaginations and hearts of sort of millions upon millions worldwide?
Well, the first thing, is it's a great story. Everybody needs a great story. That's the first question. Is something a great story? And these are very effective stories with memorable characters and substantial characters. And everybody loves magic. I mean, and it's a broad range of emotions. It's fun. It's scary. It's sad. It's joyful. All of these wonderful elements combined into one great story. It's irresistible.
And when you watch the film back, are you able to sort of enjoy it as an audience member would? Are you constantly listening to the score and you kind of scrutinising over that side of it? Or are you able just to kind of suspend your disbelief and just go, right, I'm just going to watch this like any other viewer would?
No. I don't think I really enjoy much watching a movie with my music in it so soon after I've written it. It doesn't mean I don't really enjoy the movie. I really did enjoy it. We went to the New York premiere a few days ago, and it was spectacular. And the London premiere, I think, is tomorrow. So, no, it's wonderful to watch. But, I'm always sitting there thinking, I should have used this theme a little bit more, or I didn't do that quite right. And, it's hard not to be self-critical in those situations. But having said that, I think I did an okay job.
But is that only regarding kind of recent projects? If you were to watch a movie that you sort of scored the soundtrack for, say, 20 years ago, for example, I mean, would you be able to kind of watch that and not worry too much or think about your own kind of contribution to that film?
I doubt it. It's really hard. In fact, it's kind of ruined me to be watching movies, period. My wife won't even go to the movies with me hardly anymore because I'll sit there and complain about the music or I'll make comments about this or that. So it's hard for me to be swept away, but it does happen. I love movies a lot, and I'm as vulnerable to being swept away by a good movie as anybody. So it does happen.
But when sort of stumbling across a film you've worked in the past, which I imagine must happen quite often, considering your kind of back catalogue, and there's always be something on the telly. Do you ever just go, "That was pretty good. I didn't even realise I did that. It's quite impressive."
Sure. Once in a while I won't tell anybody, but I sort of puff up a little bit if I hear something that sounds really good. It's funny because when you see something on television, the mix is always so different from the way you remember it, the way I remember it. Like either the music's too loud, or more often than not, for some reason, that when it gets transferred from the 5.1 or the 7.1 down to a stereo, or a surround, maybe not so much now because the technology has improved, but a lot of my older movies, I can barely hear any of the music, so I can't really decide. But having said that, the worst thing of not having heard the music was having the music be too loud. So I'm always grateful that it's not overtaking the whole movie.
Because along the sort of same line, there is obviously your career retrospective taking place at the Royal Albert Hall next year. Is that quite a nervous, quite an exciting kind of thing that's coming up? It must be quite hard to sit there and hear that many people talk about you and your own career.
Yeah, it's still kind of mind-boggling that it's going to happen. I was approached by my promoter through my agent, and he said, "Listen, James has done, I don't know, 120, 125 movies, and does he ever want to come out and conduct?" And it seemed like, wow, this is a great time to do it. I've been at it for so long. How many car chases can I write? How many love scenes? It's really nice to go out and kind of a profound experience for me to revisit my own music and conduct it. So the timing is right, and I'm all of those things. I'm excited and nervous, but I think it'll be a great show.
And when you sort of do look back, is there a project you'd say you hold most closely to your heart?
I can't say that. There are so many things. If I think about, one of my favorite movies was Reese Witherspoon's first movie. It was called Man in the Moon, and I love that movie, and I really liked that score. When I did Wyatt Earp, my first son was born. When I did Prince of Tides, I got my first nomination. The Fugitive was my first big action score, and I got nominated. So, there have been all these milestones that have happened. And oddly enough, a lot of the scores that mean the most to me or that have special places in my heart are really small little musical achievements that really perhaps only I noticed, that perhaps nobody else really knows about. So I have emotional investment in everything that I do, because I try and do the best job I can each time I do it.
Have you found that it's a profession that is being more and more valued as years go by? Because I feel like with all not just yourself, but we're seeing a lot of these kind of these films play here at the Royal Albert Hall, for example, with live orchestras and stuff. It feels like we're starting to appreciate music and film more so. Is that something that you would say is true? Are we starting, a sort of general public starting to appreciate your craft a little more over recent years?
It sure seems that way. I love that's the trend now. Certainly in Europe, it's not as much of the trend in the United States, although it is starting to happen more. David Newman, who's a wonderful composer and conductor, has been doing a lot of live to film concerts in Los Angeles and around the country. So I hope it happens more there. But yeah, sometimes I wonder if the music is valued as much as I would like to see it valued by the industry. But I think all composers perhaps feel that way to some extent. I feel incredibly lucky in that I've been able to continue working and offered these great movies, so I really don't have any complaints. But it's great to see it happening live. Yeah, it's a good thing.
Do you think that Spotify and kind of YouTube and stuff is helping in that regard? Because now people have got quite instant access to film soundtracks of just sort of right there. You don't have to sort of go out now and just buy it. You can just go into Spotify, type a soundtrack, and usually get, even if people have put it together themselves and assembled it, it seems that we've got kind of instant sort of access now to film scores.
It does. There's much to complain about, I guess, from a royalty perspective, but I think for me, it's been amazing that so many people are listening to the scores that I've done. You're right. There's no way that those people would have bought CDs. So I think, back before Spotify and all these things happened, if I sold, 10,000 CDs, it was incredible. But now I have some extraordinary number of Spotify listeners, which is, it's very gratifying. It's fun. It's kind of amazing, really.
I mean, because by and large, I mean, I do think it is an underappreciated profession within the industry. But do you think that in some ways that's quite nice in some regards to particularly sort of your personal life, in the sense that when you sort of walk out the house, I mean, you've got, is it 8 Oscar nominations, but people won't necessarily recognise you. That must be quite nice in some ways to have that kind of wall, I guess, between your professional life and your personal life, and not have too much crossover.
Well, it's been great. It's been my modus operandi for years. I have no social media presence, and I have done relatively few interviews not just because I feel that the music should speak for itself. And quite honestly, when I hear a lot of composers talking about their work, I think it just sounds kind of obnoxious. So I just haven't done it very much. But now I'm sort of forced to do it. Ergo, my presence here today. But no, I mean, for instance, when we did the New York premiere, I didn't want to do the press line. And my kids gave me a hard time about it. And then my wife, Annika, said, you owe it to the promoter and you owe it to everybody else if you're going to do this thing. It's part of your job. So, I think I'm getting ready to surrender a tiny percent of my anonymity. Like maybe 5 people out of 1 million might recognize me.
And just to go back to Fantastic Beasts for a second, I mean, I think across the Potter movies, I think there were sort of 4 composers I think that were hired. I mean, how do you go about bringing your own sensibilities to this particular world, and at the same time remaining kind of faithful to the kind of tone that they'd already established and the kind of flavour of the series?
Well, I mean, to me the tone was, you're doing an action, fantasy, epic adventure movie, really, and that to me equals the equation for that is sophisticated orchestral writing, and that and with strong thematics. And so my biggest concern in the beginning was addressing and paying homage to John Williams' incredible Hedwig theme, but in a very small way. I mean, I lobbied just to have it used over the Warner Brothers logo in a couple of spots, but I had to really fight for that, and I had to really prove myself with my own new themes, and eventually the decision was made to go with my themes. So, but I think I already said earlier on, I just feel like the movie and the music just had to be able to survive in its own right and not be leaning on John Williams or Harry Potter or anything else.
But I mean, the Hedwig's theme is one of those sort of small pieces of music which is perfectly encapsulate a whole series of movies. I mean, when you've got something like that, do you think that does show in many regards as well the kind of power of your profession, in the sense that tune, if you hear it, you just go, that's Potter, instantly,
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I want to do during my show, and I think it's been done before, is to show some of the iconic scenes of some of the movies that I've worked on that have been very successful with no music. And then even more interestingly, I think, show them with the wrong music. And you can put kind of a goofy theme against, Katniss or Rue's farewell in the Hunger Games and ruin the whole thing very easily. So music is incredibly powerful in a movie. And, as they say, it's really the final rewrite. And I really believe that. And people mostly don't really appreciate that because they don't get the opportunity to hear it without the music and see how boring the movie would be without it.
And what different challenges arise from composing a film that's kind of enriched by fantasy, such as Fantastic Beasts, compared to, say, the score you did in Nightcrawler? I mean, how different if at all, is your approach to something that's very naturalistic and gritty and something that's completely supernatural and very sort of surreal?
Well, they're wildly different. For one thing, one has to look at your palette, what's available. In Nightcrawler, we did have a tiny orchestral presence, but there was no vocabulary really around to describe that character in the way that Dan Gilroy wanted me to describe him. With Fantastic Beasts, there was a tradition of epic and classic Hollywood film scores, which I think was the basis of the starting point for the movie. So from there, what made it identifiable and maybe unique and gave it its fingerprint and signature were my themes and how I would choose to use them, hopefully in a successful way. But in the case of Nightcrawler, my marching orders from Dan Gilroy was to do just the opposite and not treat him as a psychopath, but be in his point of view and celebrate what he's doing. And when I wrote that music, which is kind of triumphant every time he did something absolutely horrible, it really threw people off center, and I think it was very successful in just creating a distinctive emotional point of view.
Do you personally always have to find that kind of sense of humanity within the film, within the characters, to help you craft the
Absolutely, I think that's what it's all about. I mean, I think David Yates really helped me negotiate some of the really tricky parts in Fantastic Beasts, because there were some of the beasts I was treating, as just purely scary or pure in jeopardy. And in fact, in one of the beasts, we went from being very scary to playing the beast as very romantic, as though the beast is a suitor of one of the characters. And it's very funny and sounded ridiculous, but the whole scene really came to life once we did that. But that took a lot of exploration. I was guided very carefully by Dan Gilroy in the case of Nightcrawler, and getting to do another movie with him next year, actually, with Denzel Washington, that I think is going to be astounding.
Because one of the things I did love about Fantastic Beasts was the kind of social, political context. I mean, even though it's quite subtly kind of implemented, I think particularly when Newt Scamander goes to America and he finds out there's this kind of segregation between the Muggles or the No-Majs and then the Wizards, and I find that quite an interesting, particularly at the moment. I mean, is that one of the appeals to you as well? That whole aspect of this movie, the kind of the quite slight, quite subtle examination of kind of human society.
Well, I can't say that was one of the draws for me, in all honesty, because I think that was something that immersion in the movie begins to open up possibilities for one as a composer, and that was certainly something that played very importantly. I don't think anybody could have predicted what's going on now in the United States, which I find absolutely horrific and terrifying. But I really didn't think about it in any real political way so much in Fantastic Beasts. But certainly humanity, human emotion was what I was most concerned with.
There's the sequel set to be set in Paris, which I think is, well, at least a large part of it.
Who said?
Yeah, who said? People in news forums.
All right, great.
So the sequel might be taking place, some of it in Paris. But I was just wondering as well how much the location informs your job. The location of it, if it was Paris compared to being New York, or if it was London. I mean, how much does that have a bearing as well on the score that you compose?
You don't want to write a travel log really, but I think the location, you have to acknowledge it. New York, I didn't really acknowledge the place so much as I did the period. There were a couple of cues where I felt like I wanted to write sort of ragtimey kind of music, and I think it worked. But generally speaking, I think what holds true in all of these is just the fundamental storytelling and what is the basic palette. It's going to change subtly for every movie, of course, but I'll have to wait and see. Could impact me, might not.
I mean, you sort of touched on it before, but I mean, obviously, you've had this quite remarkable career, and you said sort of 120, 125 movies you've worked on, and some have been incredibly successful, made more money than you can even imagine, and some sort of less so. I was wondering when you can tell, when you kind of work on a movie, can you sort of instantly kind of go, I think this is one that's really going to take off? I mean, are you able to kind of predict the kind of box office, or how people might kind of take to a movie you've worked on from quite an early stage?
Not at all. I'm not able to predict box office at all. What I am able to say is I think this is a good movie, that I'm proud of this work, and that some movies have flaws that seem unfixable, and other ones have minor flaws that people will probably overlook, and some you just feel incredibly confident about that come out and disappear in a weekend. Knocking on wood, I have a pretty good feeling about this one, and I think it's a great movie, and it's one I'm really proud to be involved with. And beyond that, the results are really out of my hands.
So regardless of how the film does end up looking from the kind of edit and then post-production, do you always just look back and go, well, I'm pleased in what I did in that movie? Or do you think the film, you need to appreciate the movie as a whole to then be able to appreciate what you
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very hard to sort of look at a piece of music on its own without the context. And so I think the whole thing it involves the one thing we talked about earlier, which is just storytelling, and how well the music helped tell the story and help people understand what the filmmaker was trying to say here, and what the character is about, and whose point of view we're in at any given moment. So I really look at the whole thing and hope for the best.
And David Yates has been confirmed to direct all of the 5 movies in this franchise. I was just wondering if you've had conversations yet as to whether you'll be scoring the future projects, or if that's still yet to take place.
No, I've been asked to do the next one, which is fun, and we haven't talked about anything beyond that.
So when dealing with a franchise, do you have to think ahead when you were making Fantastic Beasts? I mean, it was pretty clear this is probably going to be a story that is going to have sequels to it, which is great news. But I mean, do you have to think about that? Do you try and craft something that you think that might be something I use again in future movies, or do you only ever think about sort of here and now? Obviously, that applies to the Hunger Games as well.
No, I think the feeling and the hope is that we've created themes in Fantastic Beasts that will be useful and appear and exploited actually more in the next film. There are a couple, like the main title, for instance, which when it comes on and goes from Hedwig's theme into the main title of Fantastic Beasts, I think is a real terrific piece. But I didn't have a lot of places to use it in this one, but I have a feeling I will. It's kind of a fanfare. So I'm thinking about that. How else can I use that piece? How else can I use Newt's theme? How else can I play the umbrella theme of Fantastic Beasts in more romantic, perhaps, ways, and just utilize the material that we've established in this first movie?
So we have got about a year until this retrospective back here in London. I'm just wondering what's in your diary in that time. Have you got any exciting projects that you're working on in that period that you'd like to talk about?
I do. I'll be doing another movie with Francis Lawrence, who directed all the Hunger Games. Well, 3 of them. Gary Ross did the first one. With Jennifer Lawrence, called The Red Sparrow, which is a really exciting spy thriller. I'm doing the next Jumanji with the Rock and Jack Black and Kevin Hart, which will just be fun. And it's directed by Jake Kasdan, who is the son of my dear friend Lawrence Kasdan, with whom I've done, I think, 7 movies. And I'll also be doing some preliminary work on Nutcracker in the Four Realms, which is a Lasse Hallström film. That's a live action and CGI telling of the Nutcracker, starring Keira Knightley and Morgan Freeman. So that's going to be really fun too. So I have a busy year.
But these projects are also wildly different. Are you able, obviously with years and years of experience, just to go from one to the next, or do you always need a little bit of a gap in between just to kind of reassess, particularly with the genres that you're covering are so stark?
I'd like to get a gap. You don't always get a gap, It's hard. I'm at a wonderful time. I've just been so lucky, and just all these great movies have been made available to me. So, yeah, I think what makes it a little bit easier is they're so wildly different. I think it would be hard to do, 3 fantasy scores in a row and keep your brain straight. But, the fact that the Jumanji is so different from the spy thriller, which is so different from the Nutcracker, I mean, it's probably helpful in that way.
Must keep it quite exciting, I guess.
It does, and then I have this tour to also get ready for. So
that old chestnut.
Yeah.
So just my very final question. Obviously, we sort of touched upon it very briefly before, but obviously America is going through quite a huge change at the moment, which I think really kickstarts in January. Do you think that will have any impact on the film industry?
God, I hope not. I don't. I really don't. I at first, like most people, or like a lot of people I know anyway, and I think most people actually in the United States, everybody was just horrified and appalled. And then you think, well, what are you going to do? The best thing we can do is just hope for the best and just work to further the causes we believe in. And I have a feeling that, and I don't have a feeling, I'm choosing to be optimistic about it because I don't really know what else to think. I have children, and I'm trying to imagine what the world is going to be like that they're going to grow up in, and I'm hoping that everybody is able to reach some kind of common ground and make the world a better place. It's pretty crazy right now.
Thanks so much for your time today. It's been much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.
Hey, you